Okay, hi everybody, and welcome to From Fatigue to Phenomenance. We'll get it right in a minute. Weirdly, Fiona cuts. So, it's not going to be about me at all. This is all going to be about Fiona and what the delicious creation that she's got going on. So, let me hand over to you, Fiona. What's it all about?
Yeah, so probably, well, I know you know that I used to have chronic fatigue syndrome, and now, many years later, almost to the point that I can't remember how long it is since I recovered, my life is just expanding and growing, and I'm creating more. And sometimes when I have clients who have fatigue, I almost find it hard to empathize or to be with them because it feels like it's so long ago for me now. So, yeah, from fatigue to phenomenon.
All right. So let me just explain. If I'm often look like I'm not paying attention, it's because I'm picking up questions from various places. So just if you're watching this, there is a Q&A on the event that's actually, you can pop your questions in there and we'll pick them up from there. And also you can put them in the Facebook event that you may well have signed up to. So pop the questions in and we'll try and address them or Fiona will address them as we notice them. So where do we start? Fiona, I mean, to be frank, what the fuck is chronic fatigue? Because people hear about it, I remember hearing about it in the 80s as being yuppie flu and people think it's just you being lazy. So what is chronic fatigue?
Okay, so maybe I can answer that by telling you a little bit about what my life was like, sort of at its worst in a way. And for me, it felt at the time as though I went from a quote-unquote normal life where I was able to do quite a lot. I was studying at the time. It felt like from one day to the next, I went from that normal level of fatigue to pretty much nothing. And I just thought it was flu or a cold. And I remember really, really clearly about 2 weeks in, just having that moment of awareness. Oh my goodness, maybe this is something different. Maybe this is post-viral fatigue, or maybe this is any chronic fatigue syndrome. I remember that moment really well. And really, for 3 or 4 years, I wasn't able to do much. I wasn't able to listen to music. I wasn't able to talk for very long on the phone. I wasn't able to do anything with ease. I could go out of the house, but it would be like, say, a half-an-hour trip to the shops, and that was enough for the day. I'd have to rest and sleep afterwards. I had to be really careful with the amount of people I saw. And ironically enough, at the time I was doing a university degree, and one of my main symptoms, as well as the fatigue, was brain fog. So just that inability to concentrate, inability to think, inability to formulate. And I suppose that I prided myself on having a good mind, having a good brain, and then suddenly there I was, in this position of not being able to form a logical sentence, written or spoken, not being able to follow conversations. And I suppose I'd also been really, really sporty. I used to do a lot of high altitude climbing and stuff like that. And, from climbing mountains, I could scarcely walk to the park. And at my worst, I actually used to walk with a stick.
Yeah.
So that was my reality. So it's funny, I've even lost track, something like 4, 5, 6 years.
For 6 years you were like that?
Yeah, it was a long time. And I just want to say, for people who may be already listening in, so the tools that we're going to come to and a lot of what I'm going to be saying are certainly for people who are in that position of really chronic fatigue. But it's also for people who would just like to have a bit more energy. I was amazed. The reason that this Google Hangout came about was because I sent an email to the people who were on my mailing list. And I just asked people who had fatigue if they wanted to take part in a little survey and have the chance of a short session with me. And I was amazed at the number of replies I got, just amazed. And they were from people who do have chronic fatigue syndrome, so that sort of severity of symptoms that I was talking about, but also from people who would just like to have more energy, more sort of zip in their everyday life. And I suppose for me, what's super exciting is when I was ill, I was hoping for I remember somebody asked me, what would I like? And I was like, well, I was able to say walk for 20 minutes. And I said something along the lines of, I'd love to be able to go for a walk in the Lake District for maybe 45, 50 minutes. So that was the height of my aspiration when I was really ill. You know, so I suppose the fatigue and the illness kind of beats you down, so you no longer expect that much. And actually for me now, it feels as though pretty much every week my life is expanding and growing and new things are coming in. And the amount of energy I have for enjoying life, living life, doing, I mean, I can't even say work. I mean, it's play for me, the stuff that I do. I just have so much energy for all of it.
So, yeah, there's so many places that I'd love to.
Yes,
Yeah, you know. So when you were at your worst, what kind of support did you have from people around you? Were people supportive? Were they not supportive? How did that work?
So I was in some ways fortunate in that I was a student at the time, and so a lot of students end up with this condition, and so my GP knew about it. And actually, I already had a little bit of experience of alternative therapies and homeopathy. And I remember really clearly my GP saying, well, look, there's not much that we can do, actually. So it's good that you're into alternative therapies, so good luck. So I didn't have any of that, people not believing that I was ill or anything like that going on. And then in terms of personal support, actually at the time I was a Buddhist, and I had quite a supportive community around me. So friends who were there for me, people who I could talk to. And again, in the Buddhist community, a lot of people had the experience of people having this condition. And so I didn't have what I know people find very painful of people not believing them, and that whole thing of the yucky flu and all of that. I didn't have any of that.
Right. So for those people who don't have that network, how can they get support?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what to say to that. Although I suppose I can go to what I sometimes say to my clients, which is that there is some online support. And I think that some of the fatigue groups kind of buy into the fatigue, if you like, and there's a lot of sort of storytelling, and you kind of, I mean, I've had most people who I know who come to me for sessions say they feel almost worse from being in those groups because there isn't that sort of sense of helping themselves. But there are some supportive forums online.
That's interesting. Can you say more about not getting drawn into the story of it?
Yes, yeah, I can, because I guess from an energetic point of view, so there is something that we call chronic fatigue syndrome, or ME. And what happens, I mean, for me, as I said, I remember really clearly that moment where it was like, oh, I think I've got chronic fatigue syndrome. And for me, that immediately turned into, just in that moment of recognizing it, it turned into sort of potentially weeks, months, years of feeling tired. I knew what chronic fatigue syndrome meant because I knew people who'd had it. And it's almost like, say the first person who started to feel fatigue would notice their symptoms, and then someone else started to feel fatigue, and then it gradually builds up. And so we have this energetic idea of what chronic fatigue syndrome is. And in Access Consciousness, we say that when two or more people believe the same thing or have the same point of view, it creates a reality. So we now, as a society, as a world society, have this thing where chronic fatigue syndrome is known about, and there are even these things where, you know, you have to have certain symptoms to call it chronic fatigue syndrome rather than ME and all of that kind of stuff. And I really don't get involved with that. For me, any kind of chronic fatigue is either chronic fatigue syndrome or ME. But just to say that, I suppose I mentioned that because it's part of what we're creating. So that energy of what it means to have this illness and what it's like. And so when someone's diagnosed with it, they kind of already have a sense of what it means. And so part of the work that I do when I work with people who have chronic fatigue is to start to dismantle that a bit. So that, because I suppose somebody who has chronic fatigue syndrome can just go online and read all these sort of stories about how difficult it is, how people haven't recovered, how it's been 10 years, 15 years, 30 years, whatever it is. And people in the main tend to see the recovery stories, because there are many, many people who've recovered. And I mean, I know several people have talked to me in Access Consciousness about having recovered, and there are people who've recovered using different modalities. And that isn't out there so much. So part of the work I do is about disengaging the person from that whole energy, if you like, where we've all agreed what the illness means and what it means to have the illness.
So is chronic fatigue real, or is it, you know, like a psychological thing, or is it kind of a physical thing? What, you know?
Yeah, no, really good question. So I would say, first of all, the symptoms of fatigue, when you're in them, are absolutely real. There's no, you know, they're debilitating, horrible, frightening, scary. That is all true, that when you have that fatigue in your body, it's real. And the other side of that is that there are ways and methods of releasing it. And what we say in Access Consciousness is that we're an infinite being, and so we are joy and happiness and fun and laughter. Well, those light qualities, and obviously the fatigue is heavy, and it's not that. So in another way, it's not real, because it isn't the true nature of who we truly are. And what we can do is move away from the heaviness of the fatigue towards that lightness, that person who we truly are, you know. And for me, who has that vitality and is able to do loads and enjoy their lives, you know, it's possible to move from one to the other.
I guess, you know, going back to what you were saying about, you know, when two or more people have their point of view, it kind of becomes reality.
Yeah.
I had a client once. She was only 16 when I first started seeing her, and at the time it was completely new to me. She had ME rather than CFS. And what I noticed after the 2 years was she had an unwillingness to actually want to change it, but so did her family. That whole family structure was around this young girl's illness.
Yeah.
And whenever it felt like things were getting kind of better for her, you know, her parents were kind of arguing more, and they were almost splitting up, and so then she kind of made herself ill again, and the attention was on her sister. She wanted to bring it back to her. So there's all of that stuff going on.
Yeah.
So I guess it's really important for family, you know, when you're doing this kind of work with people who have ME and CFS, is it just as important to do some work with the people who are supporting them?
That's a really good question, and it's certainly true that, well, I count myself lucky that I had the support when I was ill, and I suppose I also count myself lucky that people around me understood the illness to a certain extent. And yes, sometimes what I do with the processes of Access Consciousness is that I sometimes say to the person who's ill, actually, if there's somebody who's able to help you with touching your body and running these processes, then that can be a real help. And I suppose the thing that goes against that is that, say, when I was in the Buddhist community, there was a sort of an understanding of illness and almost like an acceptance of it. And for me at the time, it's like within that sort of acceptance, I was able to find some peace and some joy. But what I see now is that the acceptance was actually a bit limiting, and that I could have been more well than I knew I could be, and that the people around me thought I could be. It was almost like there was a sort of in Access terms, aligning and agreeing with the condition, and was sort of almost like yes, for you, this is all you can expect now from your life. And so whilst it was supportive in one way, and it felt great at the time, it wasn't sort of challenging me to choose more in a way.
Yeah, and I was going to ask, you know, is that really a kindness when people are kind of, you know, just to be blunt, you know, bringing the story of this is what it is, therefore you cannot change it. It's like, it's almost like you accept that this is the fait accompli. For the rest of your life, you will have this, and you're just going to have to do with the rest of it. And I think, always, you know, from what you're saying, from what I can gather, is that was it. That was great to start, because you could start to come to terms with at least what was going on.
Absolutely.
But then what? You know,
Yeah, no, and that's a really good point, because I think when you first get, I mean, again, we're talking about the chronic fatigue here, but when you first get chronic fatigue, maybe the body does really need to rest. I know my body really needed to rest. You know, I've been pushing and pushing for years and not living a balanced life, and there was a period of time that my body just needed to rest. I needed to stop studying, stop using my brain and my mind so much. And I think what can happen is that for many people that time frame just continues and continues and continues. And at a certain point, actually, there are ways that we can come out of it. And I suppose for me, looking back, I remember that there was a thought that kind of plunged me into illness. It was after the first term of my university course. And it had been really, really hard work. You know, I'd been working so hard, there'd been exams and blah, blah, blah. And I suddenly realised that we'd had one term, we had another term which was very similar with coursework and exams, and then we had the dissertation. And I literally had that thought, I can't carry on. And it was almost as though my body heard that thought and gave me a sort of a reason or an excuse not to carry on. And sometimes the body can be really literal and respond to our thoughts like that. And so for me, after the period of resting, there then followed a time of sort of investigating alternative things, trying to see what I could do to get better, seeing what was out there, trying things, feeling hopeful, then feeling despair again, getting a bit better and it not staying. And probably if there are people who have any on here, you'll all know that story. You know, you're full of hope, you try something, it seems to be better, and then it doesn't work. And for me, I would say the turning point was quite an uncomfortable encounter with a therapist, and this wasn't anybody in Access Consciousness, where she pretty much said to me fairly directly, actually, you need to take responsibility for what's going on here. And it's almost like in Access terms, we would say, we created the illness. So for me, I created the idea that I couldn't carry on, and you know, there were other things no doubt in the mix there, but that was one of the obvious easy to relate examples. So I created that I couldn't carry on, and so actually it's possible for me to uncreate it and to create wellness. And I know that often when people hear this, they can say that it's unkind to the person who has the illness. Oh, how can you say that somebody's created it? That's so unkind, that's so unkind. And for me, so we are talking about health, we are talking about illness, but actually any area of our life that isn't working, so I mean earlier today we were talking about money, so if we have anything other than massive amounts of money and that sort of openness to receiving, then there's some kind of block there, there's some kind of unconsciousness there. And it's the same with our bodies and illness. If we're not in perfectly good health, there's some kind of block there. So that's all we're saying. In fact, we're not saying anything different for somebody who has illness from somebody else who has an issue in another part of their lives. And actually the way that I see it now is that there's no blame attached. It's almost like it's a result of having these minds. The fact that we have these minds and our bodies almost come from the thoughts that we have in our mind, and our lives come from the thoughts that we have in our mind. That's what leads to the sort of wonkiness either in our bodies or in our lives. And there's no fault in that. It's just how it is in a way. And so if we can get to the point where we are willing to see that we've created something, it also gives us a tremendous freedom, because if we can create it, then we can also uncreate it. We can also create wellness and fun and phenomenance, and so it kind of has an immense freedom with it too.
And what about, and I know this is a bit controversial, and I'm not saying this to offend anybody, but what about those people who have a belief that it's fate, or it's God's punishment, or, you know, it's karma from previous lives, because that can keep you really locked up. And I'm not saying people should ditch their relationship. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, so how can people in those situations who have CFS or ME or, you know, other kind of fatigue, how can they marry the two? How can that? You know what I mean?
Yes. You're asking.
I know I'm asking some really horrible questions, but
That's a hard question, Alan.
I'm just picking up on the kind of what people are, and yeah, I'm asking what would create the most. So
Yes. So I'm not sure I have an answer to that, because for me, those beliefs don't feel so expansive and true now. And I don't want to offend anybody by saying that, but it doesn't feel so true to me now.
mm-hmm.
And so I suppose actually what I'm going to say is that there are many different ways of recovering from this illness. And we've talked about the fact that there is this sort of belief, the collective belief of what the illness is, and there's also sort of like the individual belief system that may have caused the fatigue. But there's also, well, there's the physical body. So there's our physical body absolutely exhausted. So there are things that we can do to create some strength and resilience in the physical body that maybe are less connected with beliefs. And so in Access Consciousness, we have a lot of beautiful body processes that are literally about bringing the strength to the body. There are some that build the immune system. There are some that literally almost impart the sort of missing strength to the body. There are some actually that are about joy, because of course when we're really ill with chronic fatigue syndrome, you know, we're not joyful. We can be really stuck in the depths of despair or sadness. So there are some that literally impart that joy back into our bodies. And so it's almost like, I suppose I'm saying there are alternative approaches that don't have to contradict someone's belief system.
Right.
And it's possible that, well, and that those can really, really change things for people.
So what was, I'm not sure if you've answered this already, so my apologies if you have. So what was the turning point for you? Was it that kind of the therapist saying you created it and therefore you can uncreate it? Was that the point when you said, okay, I've had enough of this?
So I would say yes, and then it's almost as though then a few things happened in rapid succession, and I found out about the emotional freedom technique, which really helped me, and then I found the healer, and that really helped me, and I did 3 years of training as an energy healer, and that was what got me back to, I would say, a good level of strength and resilience and no fatigue. I mean, what's happened for the last 2.5 years for me with Access is that my body just has a different quality to it from anything that I'd even experienced before Access. There's like a resilience in it, and yeah, I don't, there's something about, I remember even before I got ill, I would always be thinking, oh, I wonder if I'm going to get a cold, I wonder if I'm going to get this infection or that infection. And of course, when you have chronic fatigue syndrome, that's even more loaded, because you think, oh, well, I'm tired enough already, and then I'm going to get some bug or some horrible thing. And for me nowadays, I can say that for the past, I don't know how long, year and a half, I don't even think about that. It's like I just feel there's a level of strength in my body that doesn't even allow that in as a question, really. Mm-hmm. And in terms of the amount I'm doing, I flew to India earlier this year, and it was literally like I stepped off the plane and carried on living. There wasn't any real jet lag either way. And it's, in a way, it's that's sort of a big example of how it is in my life. I can just sort of carry on, doing things, creating, having fun, just in a very expansive way.
Mm. So, with all of that going on, with kind of, I guess, like, I want to ask, how much did you judge yourself, do you think, while you were going through that, and how much judgment did you receive from other people? Because, you know, I know from dealing with my client at the time that she would put up with all sorts of judgments, people who didn't kind of really, I don't really like the word understand, but kind of get what was going on for her, and they would aim all sorts of, oh, she's being lazy, she's just protecting. Yeah. You know, how do you deal with that kind of, because surely that makes you feel even worse.
Yes, absolutely. So I wasn't so aware of this at the time, but this is what I love about Access, and we talk a lot in Access about how we make ourselves wrong, how we judge ourselves, and how to release that judgment. And in retrospect, I was making myself really wrong when I had chronic fatigue syndrome. I was making myself really wrong to get it in the first place. But I was making myself wrong as I was recovering. I was actually living in a Buddhist community with 6 other women when I got better, when I had ME, and there was that sort of extra layer of beating myself up because, you know, we were all doing the housework and the cooking and the looking after the garden, and often I couldn't do it, and I used to really make myself wrong about that. And then sometimes some of the women who were sort of pressurized themselves, I could tell that they were sort of angry with me about it, even though, you know, there was this sort of, I was going to say pretending, it's not quite pretending, but there was this sort of trying to have allowance for me or acceptance for me. So, yeah, learning these tools to not make myself wrong, to come out of judgment of me, which is very much the territory of access consciousness, has been so liberating. And the thing about judging ourselves is it takes up so much energy. It's really, really tiring to judge yourself. And although I didn't use those terms when I was doing my energy healing training, I can see now that a lot of the release was around that. So releasing all the times where I've made myself wrong, all the things, all the times I've judged myself, all the times I've judged myself in the past, all the times I'm judging myself in the present. It's like this, releasing that with access can just bring so much freedom.
So would it be fair to say then that one of the first steps to letting go of or changing what the situation is to start letting go of all the judgments, because you're not putting the energy into them, and therefore you into changing something else?
Yeah, actually, let's do this. Let's have a couple of really, really, really practical tools, and they are going to be really basic tools for those of you who already know some access consciousness. And actually, I was going to say that's okay, because if we really, really use these tools, they can bring massive change. So the first thing to say for a lot of us who have any level of fatigue, so whether it's the extreme of chronic fatigue syndrome that we've been talking about, or just a level of fatigue that we don't want to have, is that often we're very, very sensitive people. So often we're very sensitive to our environment, we're very sensitive to what's going on around us. And often we're picking up lots of other people's stuff. So you know that thing of sort of walking into a room and knowing who's angry, who's happy, and, you know, picking up all that energy. And so we can pick up a lot of psychic energy, so the anger, the sadness. And so the tool is really simple, just to ask, is this mine? Is this anger mine? And just if we recognize that we're picking it up from somebody else, just saying, please go back to sender with consciousness attached. And yeah.
So just to say something about that, how potent just that can be, is to talk about, so earlier we were doing a telecall on money, and at the beginning of that telecall I was telling you I had a headache that I couldn't kind of seem to shift. And you were asking me, is it mine or is it kind of a whole load of other people's? And yeah, we're having somebody ask that question to me, and I kind of gave it all back. It's like, okay, I know that's not mine, and my headache it's not come back.
Yeah, beautiful, yeah.
And that was hours ago. So, you know, this stuff really, really can work. If you don't even need to understand how. I don't care how it works. If I'm asking if that's mine and I know it's not, and I can just go, well, return to sender with consciousness attached, and my headaches go, I would kiss Gary and Dane for that, because headaches are not comfortable for me.
Yes, fantastic, yes. And so we can use this. So when we have chronic fatigue syndrome, we probably have all kinds of symptoms in our body. So I didn't used to have much pain, but I know that a lot of people, maybe more on the fibromyalgia spectrum, also have a lot of pain in their body. And so any of these symptoms, we can just check in, is this mine? Is this fatigue mine? And you know, how many people talk about fatigue? It's just endemic in our society. You know, you ask somebody how they are, and it's almost always, oh, I'm okay, but I'm a bit tired. It's like it's so common. So we can pick it up all the time. So just that very simple tool Is this mine? No. Please go back to sender with consciousness attached.
And
you may need to do it several times. This is mine, this is mine, this is mine.
Yeah. Sorry, I was kind of diving in there. It's like just on you were saying about people, I'm okay, but I'm a bit tired. How often do we hear people say I'm sick and tired?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah. So we can repeat that more than once. Do you think?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Sometimes we may need to return it to sender and say that a few times.
Okay.
We talk in access, I'd like to take that a step further. We talk in access about how often the people who I've just described, sort of the sensitive people, how often we're kind and caring, and it's almost like we can take stuff out of other people's bodies. So we can take the fatigue, we can take the sadness, we can take the anger, sort of misidentifying that we're going to heal the other person, we're going to make the other person better. So often, so for me, I know that I took despair out of my mum's body, and I know I took anger out of my dad's body, and we don't know what's going on. But just having that information it felt like a relief for me, just to know that, okay, am I healing somebody here? Yes. And for me, one of the things we can do with that is almost have a dialogue with our body. So body, yeah, I know that you're healing people. I know you're healing my mum. I know you're healing my dad. And what can happen for me, I knew the vibration of despair really well. So it's like if there's despair anywhere, I can pick it up and I can think it's mine because it's so familiar to me. So it's just about having that dialogue with my body. What despair isn't mine. And what would it take? So this is a question, a tool for you. What would it take to be aware of what's going on? So to be aware of the despair, for example, without taking it into my body, mind. And so that can begin to change it a bit. So it's like we have the awareness of what's going on for someone else, but we're not acting from that space as though it was ours.
I was just about to say that.
Does that make sense? Yeah,
absolutely. Because I was going to go on to say, if our bodies automatically are taking all of this crap and crud out of people's, illness and stuff, how the frig do we stop that from happening? Because I know I do it, and I use the tools, and that's kind of how I do it. But from someone who's new to this, how do you stop your body from automatically just sucking in everybody else's poo?
Yeah. So that's one way to start that dialogue. Another way is a couple of really, really simple, well, I don't know if they're simple or not, but a couple of questions. So one of the questions is, how much space can I be for all of this to be easy? So in Access Consciousness, we talk about the body and we talk about the being, so the energetic being. And what can happen when we have an illness is that the energetic being really contracts, so that it's almost like it's within the body, it's smaller than the body. And so if there is some despair, say the despair is like this and we're kind of tightly wrapped around it, of course the despair is going to seem ginormous in our universe. Whereas if this is despair and we ask that question, how much space can I be for all of this to be eased, then expanding out energetically just allows the despair to be a much smaller component of what's going on and becomes way easier to deal with. And yeah, so
I'm loving that question. And, it's like I forget to use it, and we can use it with stuff like, but you can use that for everything. I know this is about fatigue, but it's like for anyone listening, it's like when you're in that space of I'm stressed about money, it's like, okay, so how much space can I be for this to be total ease? And how much stuff that we create in our bodies is because we're worried about money, or we're worried about our job, or we're worried, it's like how much of the CFS stuff, and so when you can recognize that there are these simple tools that will start to give you the space to choose something different. Yeah.
And I just want to add something in there, because often people can say, well, how do I do that? It's like I say it very simply, how much space can I be for all of this to be eased? Well, how do I create that space? So actually, energy will just follow the question. So actually just asking that. And sometimes it happens even before you ask, because it's almost like before you even, the words are slower than the energy. So it's like, how? And it's almost already happened. And so just trust that you know how to do it. And one thing that came up earlier in the day of something else, do you have to believe in it? No, you don't have to believe this stuff. Just experiment with it. So many people are getting so much freedom with this, so why shouldn't it be you? Why not just give it a go and see what happens?
Yeah, awesome. All right.
And can I just mention one other really simple question which can really help with that? So what would it take for my allowance to exceed my awareness? So we have that situation, we're all really, we're laughing because we all know.
I know, because I was about to ask you that.
Yeah. Oh, okay, there we go. So we have this example, we're all sensitive, and again, it can feel like that despair, or so that's what it is for me, but whatever it is, can seem so full on, so intense, we're so acutely aware of it. And our allowance is that space, that kind of space, where the despair doesn't trigger us, the whatever it is that's going on doesn't trigger us so much. So it is, again, it's that sort of expansive energy, it's a different way of getting such expansive energy. So what would it take for my allowance to exceed my awareness?
It's funny, actually, just something, and to forgive me if I sound like I'm imposing, but there was something else that somebody else asked recently, was if I had no point of view about this, and I guess that could be a question to use as well. If I had no point of view about CFS, what could I change here?
Yes, absolutely. And that question will just disengage you from that massive energy field of points of view of all the people who've decided what CFS is, all the doctors who will tell you that you can't get better, all of that kind of amorphous kind of glob of stuff around CFS. So just asking that question will begin to disengage you from that, so that you get into the infinite possibilities for you and your body. Yeah.
And I suppose, you hear stories about people who heal themselves of cancer just by, they don't have any treatment, they'll do, kind of positive thinking or laughing, whatever it is. And I wonder, how much capacity, if our body has the capacity with us to create what's going on, what if we could ask our body to use those capacities to create something different? Is that something that people could consider?
Yes, absolutely. So it is possible to have that dialogue again with your body, and just in a way, just ask your body, what do you require here? Body, what would you like to enable healing here? Body, what do you require to feel less fatigued here? Those kind of questions can lead you to, well, I suppose a bit like me, when I realized that, when I was willing to take responsibility for having created it, things then came to me, and so I found out about the energy techniques. I found about this. I found out about that. So we can invite in things that can help us to get better by asking the question, or by tuning into our body to see what our body requires.
Because how often do medical, I remember with the young person I was working with at the time, she was told she had to eat these things and had to eat at these times and she had to have a snack, and she was just like, look, I really don't want this, it's not what my body requires, it's this. And she was willing to trust. I suppose that's it, is like we are conditioned to trust what doctors tell us over and above what our awareness of our body is, that tells us what it requires. And
yes. And I think I do know, of course, well, I described that I went from that thing of being sort of walking at high altitude and doing loads to suddenly my body collapsing. So it can feel like your body's betrayed you when you have this illness. And so actually starting to ask these questions around the, body, what do you require here? It's almost like, I'm just getting a sense, although I've never really seen it like this before, but it's almost like it can begin to build up that trust in the body again. Because it's a really miserable place to be in, because a lot of people who have chronic fatigue syndrome have been quite active and healthy, or have done a lot with their body, have moved around a lot and done a lot. And so it can be that scary space of, it feels, like your body has betrayed you and you can't trust it anymore. So it can just begin to change that energy so that you can begin to actually listen to your beautiful body again and see what it requires and give it that love and nurturing. And actually that brings me back to something I know we mentioned the body processes early, but I really would love just to say something about the bars too.
So,
yeah, what would I like to say?
What are the bars, Ms. Cups? Tell us about how do the bars help? How does running?
Yeah, so the bars are hands on the head process, and there are 32 points on the head that relate to different aspects of our lives. And as we touch those points, it's like, well, it's often likened to defragging a computer. So it takes away those old, out-of-date programs that we're working on, and allows us to be in the new energy, if you like. So even saying it like that, sort of defragging, I mean, obviously that's going to be helpful for somebody who's in that extreme shutdown of the body. It's going to be releasing stuff that caused that shutdown and that coming into fatigue. But for me, it also goes quite a long way beyond that. So what I noticed, I mean, I've been receiving the bars for maybe 2.5 years now, and what I noticed is that as time goes by, when somebody puts their hands on my head, I'm receiving way more than I did at the beginning. And it's almost as though it's by having those processes run over time, the body gets used to just taking in energy in a way that often we've learned not to do.
Right.
And I mean, what I notice is that I can feel energized, way more energized than I used to, from being in nature, from being barefoot on the grass, from just walking around. It's like I take in less food than I used to and receive more from around me. And that receiving more from around us is, of course, really helpful with fatigue, because it means that we're receiving the energy that can keep us going throughout the day. So it's almost like, for me, that's a kind of I could say a side effect. It's one of the things that bars gives us, as well as releasing and defragging. It also gives us that capacity to take in more from the world around us. And I suppose the way I see it now, when I have fatigue, I was also just really, really shut down. And I think because it can be so painful to spend a lot of time with other people, we can almost create this armoring around us. And actually the armoring stops all the beneficial energy coming in as well. So the bars kind of dismantles that, so that we can actually receive way more from the environment, from people.
So this hangout is called From Fatigue to Phenomenance, and you've got a telly-series that you're starting in July called From Fatigue to Phenomenance. Excuse my language, everyone, but what the fuck is Phenomenance, Fiona?
Yeah, good question. So I'm going to sort of backtrack and say that when I had chronic fatigue syndrome, one of the things that I tried to do to get better, the therapist just said to me, "So Fiona, what would you really like from this therapy?" And so at the time, you know, I could scarcely leave the house. I had my stick or whatever it was. And my aspiration was tiny. It was like, oh, I'd love to be able to be out of the house for more than an hour a day. I'd love to be able to speak to more than one person a day. It was like, it was tiny.
Mm.
And it was almost like it was survival. And I suppose what I see Phenomenance as is that sort of exciting, creative space where we're loving our lives, where we're living life to the full, where we're thriving, where every day is new and different, where new exciting things are happening, where there are new possibilities going on all the time, where there's expansion. I suppose that's what I see for me all the time. It's all the time my life is expanding and growing, and new exciting things are coming in, and new possibilities, and more this, more that. And so it's just a very fun, alive place to be.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I want to
okay, sounds good. Would you like that? I know you have a lot of that.
I would love that. And I just, what kind of immediately flicks into my mind is, what about those people who are so still kind of into the CFS that the idea of adding all of that to their life and it being like that is just so overwhelming that they don't even, it's almost like to have that is worse than surviving.
Yeah, okay. So I suppose what I would say is that for me it didn't come all at once. So it wasn't as though I went from fatigue to Phenomenance. I mean, and so But I would also, so yeah, that's one answer. But the other answer I would say is that what I see, if I'm honest with myself, is that one reason that I got fatigued was because my life just wasn't phenomenal enough. I didn't have that phenomenance in my life. I wasn't enjoying it. And I've had clients who are in the depths of fatigue, and they've even said, we have a tool in Access, which is, what can I add to my life that would be fun? And it's almost like it's creating that space where we can have more in our lives, more in our lives, more that's fun, more that's fun. And I really hesitated to say it to somebody who had chronic fatigue syndrome. And what I found a few times is that actually people will say, yes, actually, yeah, I can see that part of the reason I got ill was because my life was unfulfilling. There wasn't enough in it. And it's really, really common when we do Access Consciousness for a while, whether we start off with fatigue or an overt illness, that we're able to do more as time goes on. It's like our energy naturally lifts and increases, and there are more yummy, fun things happening, and we're able to take them up more. So it's almost like it's a, I don't know quite where this word comes from, the side effect of clearing all the points of view, that we're suddenly able to do way more. And I think for a lot of us who are these sensitive people who pick up other people's stuff and can, think that they're in this difficult space because they're picking up everyone else's stuff, actually we all often get bored really easily. And society will tell us, okay, you need to rest, you need to be quiet, you need to have your time off, you need this, you need that. And for a lot of us, if we were really to do that, we'd get really bored. Often that question, what can I add to my life that would be more fun, is way more energizing and fun for us than, lying down for half, or whatever it is, taking a rest and not doing as much.
Two things. I've got a question that I want to ask myself, but we've had a question on the Facebook page.
Yes, yeah.
So Kaiser is saying, so she's been listening to the hangout from the beginning, and we've touched on a subject, or you've touched on a subject of trusting your body requires over what the doctors say. She's really grateful for that. She feels very stuck there. Do you have any questions or kind of processes that can help her with trusting what her body requires over what other people say?
Yeah, so sometimes in Access we can, the questions can just be really, really simple. So what would it take to trust me and my body? You can just ask something that simple. What would it take to come into that space of trust for me and my body? And I would also suggest maybe something I do sometimes is just be with my body. So just touching my face, just touching my arms, or just establishing that contact. And it's like from that space, we can be more receptive to what's going on with our bodies. So those are the two suggestions that come to me immediately. Do you have anything to add?
Something that's literally just come into my head.
Yes,
that means we have doubt.
Yes, yeah, thank you.
So do you want to talk about kind of the doubt distractors? Shall I leave that to you to do?
Yes, yeah, okay. So in Access Consciousness, we talk about things that we call distractors. And doubt is a distractor. So when we have doubt, it stops us from functioning as us, from creating what we'd like to create in the world. So that space that you describe is a space of doubting our body, doubting our ability to tune into our body. And of course, for those of us who have illness, that's completely understandable that we'd be in that position of doubt. But actually, it's really, really simple to clear it. We just say, I destroy and uncreate anything and everything that's holding the doubt in place. That's simple. And sometimes it makes me laugh with Access Consciousness, because something like that can cause a really, really big shift and allow you to come into communion with your body just by asking that. And you may need to ask it 2 or 3 times to get the full clearing.
Can it really be that simple?
Yes.
I know. I'm being really horrible, but it's just like, because we know we just, all of this stuff is just so complicated. We're taught that everything in life is complicated. Nothing we know. If we don't work hard to let go of it, we can't change it. And so we buy into that kind of, frankly, crappy point of view. And then we end up with these illnesses for far longer than we potentially could have chosen to, had we not bought into somebody else's truth.
Yeah.
lie.
Yeah.
Mm.
I'm just getting in my mind just to say something when we were talking about the doctors, and I just want to be really clear. So it's not about disregarding anything that a doctor says, or I mean, I know I started by saying that the doctors will say they don't have much to say about chronic fatigue syndrome, so there is that. But sometimes conventional medicine can give us something that's perfect for us. And we say that consciousness includes everything and judges nothing. So, and I know I know some people will say, oh, all conventional measurement is wrong, it's bad, we should work with energy. And actually for me, no, that's not the case. Actually, there may be something that the doctor says or the conventional medicine says that really helps us, but it's about tuning in with us. Is this true for me? So I don't remember the name of the person, but actually, yes. So just having that clarity, no, what the doctor says, actually, I don't think my body does want to take that tablet, or it isn't quite right for me. Some of it's right, but not all of it. So always, in a way, taking responsibility for us. And I mean, well, the tagline of Access is empowering you to know what you know. So it's like you're the one who knows about your body. And it's like all of the information on this Hangout, all of the information from conventional medicine is just information for you to make the choice that works for you.
So your telecalls then, so would you like to tell people about what they are and how are they going to help people to change?
Yeah, so we've seen in the last hour that Access Consciousness in a way has a different way of looking at the body, looking at illness. And we've explored some of the tools very briefly that can start to empower us, give us the power back when we have a condition like this, or when we have less energy than we'd like to have in our day-to-day lives. And so we're going to be diving in deeper to that different way of looking at the body and looking at more and more tools that can help you to come to this space where you're able to reclaim who you are. And as you reclaim who you are and find out who you are, the fatigue can release. So that's part of it. And I suppose, in a way, that's the space that I came to through other healing work that I did, and which Access can absolutely get us to, and I would say more quickly than the work that I did. There's sort of, well, coming into something beyond that, the sort of creative part, if you like, the Phenomenance part. So we're going to look at tuning into the body and releasing the fatigue, but also how to create something that goes way beyond that, how to actually really, really wake up in the morning loving your life, choosing things that you really desire to have in your life, creating that kind of excitement, that sort of, I've just got in my mind, that sort of creative edge of living that space. So that's the territory of it, we'll be using the tools and processes of Access Consciousness that will bring change during the session. So the sessions will be online with the chance for people to ask questions, but there'll also be many things that you can do on your own. So it's almost like the sessions can bring a lot of change, but it will also be empowering you to start seeing your life in a different way. So for those of you who maybe have chronic fatigue syndrome, really seeing it in a different way and making more empowering choices. For those of you who'd like to just have more energy, just seeing things slightly differently so that you can start to create that life where you have way more energy.
Awesome. And how do people find out more about the classes, their calls, and sign up?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, which is fionacuttenergyhealing.co.uk, and you can sign up there.
Awesome. Okay. So is there, we've got about, 4 or 5 minutes left of the scheduled time. So is there anything else that you would like to add to what you've said already that people can take away with them?
I would say, so for those of you who are up for being really open and honest and vulnerable, and who are in that space of, I am taking responsibility for what's going on, I would ask this, and it is a slightly edgy question, but I would ask, what do I love about this fatigue? And it can seem really counterintuitive. Well, and of course, it's like, oh, I don't love anything about it. But if you're really honest, you may come up with some things that actually you do love about it. And for me, I guess when I was first ill, well, I loved that I didn't have to do that horrible writing and thinking of my, I didn't have to write the essays anymore. Perfect excuse for not writing those essays. And I didn't want to see that at the time, but sort of a few years later, I was able to see, oh yeah, my body created that so that I didn't have to write the essays. And I didn't have the guts at the time to say, because I wish I wasn't doing this course. Actually, I'm going to stop doing the course and I'm going to do something that I really enjoy doing. I didn't have the guts to do that at all. I felt like I committed to the course and I had to do it. Mm. So yeah, that.
And so that's not about judging yourself. That's just about getting awareness about what it is that's keeping you choosing it. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So for me, in that case, it's like, so I didn't have to do the exam. And it's just getting that awareness, and then what we can do with that is like, so all the energy that comes up as I say, oh, I don't want to do this exam, I destroy and uncreate and let go of that energy, so we can just release it, and that's where the change comes. I mean, my own sense is that part of the change comes just by owning it, just by having the guts to say, you know what, I really was not happy doing that course, I wish that I hadn't been doing it. And now I'm owning that, and I'm just pushing it. It's almost like we're owning it, and we're just taking it out of our lives because it no longer impacts on us. That's my sense of what happens with that.
So what happens then if? Sorry, I know this we're going quite close to the end, but this question just kind of hit me. Like, so
yes,
if we ask that question, okay, so what is it I love about this, and we then find ourselves judging ourselves? What do we do about that? It's like, oh my God, I'm really crap because I've been choosing that. I've been, because I'm, we had the awareness that I didn't want to do that. Therefore, I'm really bad. It's like, it's almost like we go into that double loop of.
Yeah. Okay. So there's some really simple tools in Access that can change that. So you notice. So for me, it's like I was able to say that. Oh well, I didn't want to do the class. Oh, I didn't want to do the course. It's like for me, obviously, I don't have a point of view about that anymore because of the work that I've done in the past. But if I'd been like, oh, I didn't want to do the class and that was so stupid of me and I'm always giving up and blah, 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 then what we can do is we can just interrupt that with a simple tool which is called interesting point of view. So we can just be, I noticed that I'm beating myself up. That's interesting that I'm beating myself up. That's interesting that I'm thinking this. Interesting point of view that I'm thinking this. And just getting into that, just using that tool, interesting point of view, a few times can change the energy. So that's there are many more, and that's part of what we'll be doing on these calls. We'll be introducing some simple tools for changing things. But that's what I would say quickly.
Awesome, thank you. So, is there anything else at all you'd like to say before we hang up the hangout?
I don't think, I suppose I do want to say something. I mean, actually, this hangout has sort of focused a lot on the extreme of fatigue. And I suppose what I would like to say is, please know that it is possible to get out of this. And I know, although I'm obviously speaking more from the space of phenomenance and openness and excitement and yumminess of life, actually, I was in that space of the despair and the stuckness. And I do know what it's like. And so I suppose it is just to say, please know that it is possible to change all of this. And that, I mean, we were talking before we came on the hangout. So for me, chronic fatigue is one of the things that is often possible to change. And I'd say always possible to change to a certain degree, but it's completely possible for people to create what I've created and to move from that extreme stuck place to just a really vital, amazing, vibrant life. It's completely for all of that to happen.
Awesome. Thank you. That's Big Ben gonging us out. So thank you so much for kind of talking, being vulnerable, talking about your experience and sharing all of this fantastic stuff with everybody else. So if you are listening and now or in, kind of you're looking at the replay, do go to Fiona's website if you want to know more, fionacutsenergyhealing.co.uk, and you can sign up for the teleseries and just start to change your life. So, all right then.
Thank you, Alan.
You're so welcome. Thank you very much. Bye, everybody.
Bye.